All right. Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear and see me now. I'm going to go ahead and start with creating seamless workflows. So what I'd like to talk about today is best practices with your zirconia, zirconia selection, so that you can choose the best materials to help the process run smoother and faster. Also maximizing your equipment capabilities. Basically from start to finish, just how can you get the work done quickly, efficiently, and still look amazing, and hopefully spend less time in the lab, doing the same amount of work but less time in the lab and enjoying your summer. So the first thing that I would like to talk about is material selection, which is pretty important. So you have a lot of options these days, but you don't need to have a ton of zirconia in the laboratory. You don't have to have a massive inventory. Really, you have three needs. You need your high strength zirconia, which would be around your 1150 MPa. And this is really going to take care of all of your large restorations, large bridges, all on fours, cases that don't have a lot of occlusal clearance. That's what you want to use this zirconia for. By nature, the higher strength zirconia is less translucent. So you have a need for a higher translucency on your more aesthetic cases. In this situation, you would want to use a zirconia that's around 950 to 750 MPa, and that would be your super translucent. And this really you could use for most of your restorations. I would say about 80%. You can use those on molars, anteriors, small bridges. I would say up to 3 to 4 units. And it does have some masking ability, even though it's incredibly translucent. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. And I would say you could use this for about 80% of your work. And then when you need strength and you can't compromise there, you would go ahead and use your stronger zirconia, the 1150, 1200. And then your third zirconia option is an ultra translucent, and that's around 700 to 600 MPa. And so this zirconia, there's definitely a need out there when you have an incredibly cosmetic case, but there are some things to think about. You're going to use it for veneers, you can use it for singles, and maybe up to a 3-unit bridge, although I might steer away from that. I would probably stick with singles. And maybe a posterior single that has plenty of clearance, and you know that there's not going to be an issue and the patient isn't a bruxer. The one thing to remember about the ultra translucents, and I'm talking about any brand of zirconia, I'm not talking in particular brands, just in general, rule of thumb is if it's an ultra translucent, you are not going to have any masking ability. So just like a lithium silicate, you have to consider the patient's stump shape. So looking at all three of these options, no matter what brand you're using, you only need to have one high strength. You only need to have one super translucent and one ultra translucent. You don't need 3 different high translucent zirconias and stocking all of this zirconia. This should meet all of your needs, really. We'll talk about multi-layered and shaded versus white in a little bit, but really if you have 4 different kinds of 1100, 1200 MPa zirconia, you don't need that. You don't need to be stocking that kind of inventory. You don't need to be milling restorations out of multiple discs. You can, narrow your inventory and make things a little more streamlined. The other thing to keep in mind is material selection based on sintering temperatures. So it's really great if you're using zirconia that can go all together on the same cycle, and you don't need to run different programs, different cycles throughout the day. If you're a smaller lab, you might only have one furnace. And you need to utilize that to its best maximum capacity. So to have the freedom to put everything in on one program and it sinters beautifully all together, that's a huge plus for you. So one zirconia zirconia line where the entire family of zirconia all sinters at the same temp would be, for example, the Amann-Gerbach Ceramel Solid and the Zirlux HT Plus. All 3 materials will sinter at 1450. They all do fast center, which is amazing as well, because if you have a rush case, you can remill, center, and still get it out the same day. So really great to have that option. So $14.50. Another thing that you might want to think about, and we'll talk about it in the next slide in a little more depth, is that the furnace that you have. What is the high temp that your furnace goes to? If you have a furnace that doesn't go over 1530, you can't use a higher centering zirconia. You need to stay within the parameters of your furnace. So what you would like to do is choose your zirconia according to your furnace, unless you're looking to purchase another furnace. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Another amazing product is the Katana UTML and STML. Amazing, beautiful products. Both of those center at the same temperature. STML you can use for 80% of your restorations. The UTML is going to be an ultra translucent, which you would use for veneers or singles, and keep in mind that's not going to cover any dark stump shades. And they also have the HT now, which is actually available in all of Vita shades rather than just the value shades. So that's a really nice bonus. The HT does center at a different temperature than the UTML and the STML. That is something to keep in mind. And then we also have the Zirlux 16 Plus, and that also centers at 1550. So if you're using Zirlux and you're also using Katana, you're using those two together, you can center them together. And they come out quite nicely, and the Zirlux also fast centers. So and if you have other zirconias that are not these, just kind of look at your inventory, see what you're doing, and can you minimize your inventory, and can you pick zirconias that center at very light temperatures so you can keep everything together. If you're a larger lab and you have more furnaces, that may not be such a big issue, but it also affects your milling as well. So just something to keep in mind. I always try to keep amazing materials that center light temperatures and just keep the process moving. If you can do a fast cycle, if the material is approved for a fast cycle, even better, because you can keep your workflow flowing pretty consistently throughout the day and not having to wait for large batches. So, you can put 10 in at a time. Say you have 3 furnaces and you're putting 10 units in each one and you're running fast cycles. There's no compromise in aesthetics. You can't even really tell that it was done on a fast cycle, as long as you have kept that to 10 units and under, and obviously no large bridges because they're going to fracture. So you're looking at singles and up to 10 units. But to be able to have your workflow flowing consistently throughout the day, and the technicians being fed small batches, that's so helpful for workflow. And also if something does go wrong, it's a small batch. You also have the opportunity to remill and recenter that day and not have to make a time call. I get the question a lot, should I go shaded or white? What's best for my production? Well, you definitely have some options. I honestly prefer a shaded disc. White was great. You could customize it. You could be real creative. You could do custom shading, and it felt good because you were putting your art on there. But what does happen is you have a lot of inconsistencies with shading liquids. If one technician is out and another one fills in, they could be doing the same exact process, and the slightest thing changed. Maybe one has a heavier hand than the other. Maybe one dipped it a half of a second longer than the previous person, and you will see discrepancies in the shade. If you're a one-man lab, you're doing everything yourself, and you're happy with your results, that's great too. There's no right or wrong, but what I have found is that to be more consistent, to have less remakes, and to make the process easier, a pre-shaded disc is pretty great. Yes, you have to have a little more inventory. You're still going to use the same amount of zirconia. If you are worried about inventory, you don't have to have every single shade. You could go every other. You could do an A1 and an A2 out of an A1 disc. The other thing to keep in mind is you're not going to stock 10 discs of every single shade because you don't use them all in the same quantity. most of us are using A1, A2, A3, B1, C2, D2, so you would, have a bigger inventory on the discs that you actually use most frequently and a smaller inventory on the ones that you don't. But the great thing is that even though you have a shaded disc, you still have the opportunity to modify it and add characterization and not have to worry about, if you do have to grind on it after it's sintered, ending up with a white spot, which is just completely dreaded. I will say I think I'm a pretty good stain and glaze technician. I can mask about anything, but having zirconia with a giant white blob on it is just kind of heartbreaking, because as good a job as you're going to do, you're still going to kind of see it. It's really bothersome, and so if you can avoid that, why not? So if you start with a pre-shaded disc, pre-shaded unit, and in the photos to the left, those are actually pre-shaded units. I think they were A3, and really what we wanted to show was, with just a few modifiers on a pre-shaded disc, you can still do all that customizing. You can still have the freedom to put your art into it and be creative and have even a monolithic zirconia look like it's layered. So the restoration on top, you can definitely see that there's a gradient. On each incisal, we put a different color. So on the lateral, we put some blue modifier. On the cuspid, I think we put a little violet, and on the bicuspid, we put a little bit of gray. And you can definitely see that. The gingival is a little bit lighter, because this was a case I was doing at a lab live, and we were just kind of playing around a little bit. We put some pink at the neck, and the pink didn't show up quite enough, but the margins are also super thin. One thing you do have to remember, if you're going to put modifiers on a pre-shaded disc, is you do have to go a little heavier with your pink. If you have like an all-on-4 and you need some tissue shading, rather than putting 2 coats of the pink liquid, you may want to put 4. You can kind of experiment depending on what zirconia you're using and what liquids. Those ratios might be different. They all interact a little bit differently together. But what I have found is, start with the pre-shaded, add your modifiers. Even on a simple molar, if you just take a little bit of orange modifier and you run it along the central dissectional groove, it gives it an amazing depth, but yet you don't have occlusal staining. It's just giving it a really nice shadow. It looks real. Nobody wants occlusal staining anymore. But yeah, when you present that to the doctor and they see this zirconia crown that looks like it has this depth and character, but no, there's no occlusal staining on there, they're pretty impressed with that. So I actually, real quickly, not the greatest picture, and I apologize. Maybe I do have this with me. Maybe I can show you on the webcam and you can see it a little bit, get it to pop up. Okay, there we are. I don't know if you can see it or not, and I'll put a little glaze on there. Maybe it'll show up a little better. But what I'm going to show you is an all-on-4 that was done in a white disc, and then it was hand shaded and sintered. And I don't know anybody that doesn't contour just a little bit after their zirconia is sintered. I think we all want to touch it up a little bit. If you go too far, then you've ground off all of the shade that you put on there. It just doesn't infiltrate enough. Let's see. No, you can't really see it very well, and I apologize. But I'm pretty sure you all know what I'm talking about. You can see it on one of the laterals is much whiter than, centrals is much whiter than the other. You grind on it a couple times, then you have the white blob, and it's really, really hard to cover. And something like a large bridge or an all-on-4, to have that go to waste, or then you have to surface the whole thing and take more of the stain off and then possibly layer. It's just a hassle, and you don't need to do it. I think people are afraid to put shading liquids on the pre-shaded disc, thinking it's not going to work. It works great. I do it all the time, and I highly encourage you to try that. And it does not really add much production time. It's already shaded. You don't have to worry about the technician dipping it. The overall, your base shade is going to be consistent every time. You're just adding a little bit of blue, gray, violet to the incisal, like little feathery swipes, and then pink to the tissue if you need. Super easy, super quick. You don't have to worry about dipping, and you don't have to invest in all of the shading liquids, really just a few modifiers. And if I were gonna choose 4 that I absolutely needed to have, I would say pink, blue, gray, and violet. And then if I was going to do occlusal staining, I would get like an orange. Out is your furnace. What kind of furnace do you have? You can't just go and select any kind of zirconia if your furnace does not reach a high enough temperature to sinter it properly. If zirconia is not sintered properly, it isn't going to have the correct shade. A lot of times we'll say that there's something wrong with the zirconia, it's a defective batch, but most of the time we haven't followed the IFU. Some great furnaces available and ones that I am familiar with are the Dikemmas and also the Sintra. So one thing you want to keep in mind, if you have an older Dikemma, the 674, that's only going to go to 1530. So if you have a zirconia that you want to use or that you are using and it goes to 1550, well, you need to think about that. You're either going to have to compromise your end result or the shade. You're going to be a little higher in value, a little more opaque, or you have to select a zirconia that is within that range. So if I had a Dikemma 674, for example, I'd probably want to go with the Gerbach product or the Katana HT pre-shade. The Dikemma 674i actually goes to 1560, so you're safe to really use any kind of zirconia that you want in there. There's not a lot that go higher than 1560. 1550 is sort of the average. And then there is the Sintra, which also that will go actually up to 1600. We talked about in a previous webinar, and if you didn't see it, I would encourage you to go back and watch it. These furnaces do have different heating elements. They do require maintenance and purging on the Sintra. The Dikemma does not. But then with the Dikemma, you also have to worry about high temp. So they each have their pros and cons. What's great about all of these furnaces is they do allow you to do fast cycles where they cool in a different way, more like a porcelain furnace, so that they cool much faster and the door opens incrementally. So keep in mind when selecting your zirconia, what kind of furnace do you have? Are you thinking about upgrading? And then choosing zirconias that sinter on like cycles so that you can get it all done in one, or do fast batches if that's what you want to do. Another thing, the great thing that we have available now are mills that they're loading the discs themselves. So disc changers. In the past, I think they were, a little bit sensitive and maybe didn't work so great all the time, but the advances that the companies have made, the disc changers are fantastic. You don't have to have someone sitting there manually changing discs. The mill can mill overnight for you. You can come in and do other work that's needed rather than tending to the mill. You can load it up, go home. Load in all your different shades if you're using, the shaded pucks. This is really great. And it's not to say that we're eliminating the technician. You're just really allowing the technician to be able to do something else and utilize their time better, and maybe not work 12 hours, maybe work 8 and enjoy some of their summer. I'm sure nobody's working at the lab 12 hours anyways. I've never done that. Another thing to think about are your analog materials. Are you using materials that are up to date with your digital materials? So for example, this is just one example. So we have the Nurataki, the FC paste stain. It's a lower firing stain and glaze, which is much kinder to the zirconia. When you do run zirconia up, really over 900 Celsius, you're starting to burn out some of the colorants. And I've seen in many occasions where someone will stain a unit, send it up in the furnace. They're using a really high temperature, the crown comes down, and it's much lighter than it was when it went in, which really doesn't make sense. It should at least be, the shade that, the colors that you had applied should still be there. And so then now you're running another cycle and another cycle piling on that stain. So you really don't need to. If you can get everything done in one fire, it looks great. The shades are staying exactly where the stain is staying exactly where you put it. You're getting an amazing shine, and you only have to do it once. That's great. Who wants to stain and glaze 2 or 3 times to achieve the shade? If you can stain it in one fire, that's amazing. The other great thing about this material is you can do custom shades with it. You can actually do some internal staining on the surface and then put a layer of glaze over that after you fire the first bake. And you do the second with a thick glaze, and it's beautiful. It looks like you've done a detailed internal layering with modifiers. Really impressed with this product. If you haven't tried it, I would recommend trying it. I think that it can really increase your productivity. On cases where normally you might want to have to do an entire build-up, cut back the crown, spend all that time doing that, all that labor and all the firing, I think you'll find that you can really get what you need just with your stain and glaze, and cutting out a lot of the time and not compromising on aesthetics. And whatever I do recommend, it's always based on, yes, does it help production, but it can't compromise aesthetics. I never want to do that. I never want to recommend something that's going to give you a lesser result. So we talked about the materials and we talked about equipment, but this isn't really what you tuned in to see, but I think that it's really important and we don't think about it enough. And every time I visit a lab, or even some labs that I may have worked at, where the workflow is kind of crazy. You know, you have to take the case from point A to B, but you have to walk all over the place to get there. And it always reminds me of this cartoon that when I was younger, I used to see in the newspaper. I don't even think people read the newspaper anymore. But, you know, the mom's asking this little kid to just simply go outside and put the mail out so the mailman can take it. And the path that he takes is absolutely ridiculous. It's, you know, on furniture, behind furniture, it's a loop-de-loop. And so, you know, take a look at your lab. How is your lab set up? Does the case pan flow from one bench to the next? Are things set up in a streamlined process? Does it take that long for you to get up and walk across the room to deliver a case to somebody that might be 5 desks over? It doesn't take that much time, but I think the real thing is the distraction, the getting up, the going over there, getting back to your desk, settling back in. I think those things are pretty disruptive. So to be able to just kind of pass something to the next station or next area is really a huge benefit. Something to think about. Another thing to think about is your desk. So not only is your laboratory organized, but is your desk organized? A lot of times, even myself, wanting to have every tool available in case you need it. But the majority of the time, you don't need all of those tools. There's actually very few tools that you need to get the job done. And the less tools, the less clutter, it's easier to find it. You're not spending time sorting through a mess looking for that one tool that you need for, looking for 5 minutes. So having your desk organized and keeping the tools that you need in front of you that you use all the time. And I'm not saying throw away all your other stuff, but don't have it there as a distraction. Try to keep things very clean, in order, and everything should have its place so that when you need it, it's there and you grab it and you're not wasting time looking for it. It also helps with inventory because you can see what you have and when are you going to be out? When do you need to reorder? So kind of like a closet, trying to find something to wear in that closet to the left might take all day and you might even get lost in there. It would be much easier if you purged out what you don't wear, what you don't need, and there you open your closet or you look at your bench and what you need is right there in front of you. Actually, for me, it's really important because I like to sit down in an environment that is organized and clean and I'm ready to go. It makes me feel just ready to work and ready to go, and there's nothing holding me back. So some of the tools that I do use are right here, and there's not many of them. So I'm just going to go through and explain what I use for each step. So cutting out your zirconia, you don't need a bunch of tools. Really, you need a high speed with a carbide. If you're not using a high speed, you can use the low speed carbide. I like the 557L because it's longer and you can get in there and cut the sprues off without bumping into your units. So all I use for cutting a normal crown out of a disc. So we're going to cut it out with the carbide. We're going to actually use the white rubber wheel. Everybody has this to smooth down the majority of the sprue. If you're an experienced technician and you understand contour, you probably don't need to go to the next tool. But honestly, most newer people will end up, milling and cutting units out, more of an entry-level position. So if you are in that situation, I highly recommend a nice soft rubber wheel that is shaped like a bullet or rounded, because it convex and your crown is convex and you should be spruing at the height of contour. You have two convex areas hitting each other. So they can use this, smooth down the sprue without causing an indent in other areas of the crown, because the way that the two objects are shaped. As soon as the sprue is barely visible, stop. Now, you don't have to grind that sprue off after it's sintered. Don't want to grind on zirconia after it's sintered. You're really being risky. If you heat it up, you're going to cause a fracture. It's really hard to contour after it's sintered. Who wants to do that? So you want to get it as nice as you can in the green state. 3 tools, done. If you are going to take it a step further and say you have an all-on-4 or a roundhouse or a very large bridge, I do recommend that you do a little more post-processing in the green state to avoid contouring that after it's sintered and causing a fracture. So I would use the tools that I just showed you, but on top of that, one of my favorite all-time tools, other than the white wheel that everybody uses and loves, is this really very thin green rubber wheel. So instead of using a diamond disc after it's sintered to go in there and open the embrasures, which we all like to do, if you go in there with a diamond disc after it's sintered, you're going to score it, you're going to create the beginning of a fracture. After you glaze it a couple times or you layer some porcelain on there, that fracture is going to grow and it's going to snap at some point, whether it's in your hand in the lab or whether it's sitting there overnight and you come into it the next day, or it goes in the patient's mouth. So the great thing about this is that you can cut your embrasures, incisal, gingival, and proximal. It's super thin, but the thing that I like the most about it is that it's flexible. So as I'm cutting my embrasure, I can come up, and because it's so flexible, I can do my line angle at the same time. And it's really nice. So this one tool is doing 2 jobs. It's cutting my embrasures, and I'm also shaping my line angles. I will caution you that if you're heavy-handed, go a little slower, because it's so thin and sharp that it's easy to make a groove that you don't want to, and then you're going to have to go back in and smooth that out. Another tool I like, and I didn't have a smaller one available, but this is an inverted cone. I like to use a little bit of a smaller one. It's a diamond inverted cone. That's really great if you want to create some CEJs, some imbrication lines, and I like to also kind of create a sulcus between the tissue and the teeth, almost like a little trough in a way, so that when I am adding my pink gingival green state liquid, it almost acts as a stop. So just in case you have a little bit too much liquid on the brush and it runs up onto the tooth, that'll prevent it from running up there. So I always like to do that. You can use just a regular tapered diamond if you like, but I feel like I've had more success with the inverted cone. Then back to the same 3 tools that I showed you previously. If you need to put in some planes, then go ahead and use a flat white rubber wheel and then finish it up. Soften all of your contours with a bullet-shaped rubber wheel as well. So all of these tools, most of them are on here on the top. The only one that I wasn't able to find a photo of the order code was for the rubber wheel that's shaped like a bullet and the flexible one. Those are both available in the Zirlux Green State finishing kit. There is also the Almond Gerbox finishing kit, which has very similar tools. Theirs is black silicone, and it's more of a bullet shape, and it doesn't have the white tip. They're all great. And then, so we're done talking about the post-processing. And then after it's sintered, you want to do your final minor touch-ups. I really like if for some reason your contacts are too tight and you need to do a bulk adjustment, I really do like the Yellowstone from Harvest. It does the job, but it's really nice and smooth. I've used some stones that actually leave marks on the zirconia, or it vibrates too much. This does the job really nicely and smoothly, which is great. And then for your final rubber wheeling after you're done contouring, you can use the green Ceraglaze. This will also reduce some bulk and smooth at the same time. And if you really want to get a really nice smooth shine, you can use the yellow Ceraglaze. I do recommend that after you have contoured your zirconia, that you absolutely rubber wheel it and rubber wheel all the scratches out. In order to be able to stain and glaze it after that, you will have to do a very, very light sandblast just to take the sheen off. But you are actually doing the patient harm if you don't rubber wheel the zirconia. It needs to be smooth. Eventually the glaze is going to wear off the occlusal surface. Zirconia that is rough is absolutely going to abrade the patient's opposing natural dentition. But when it's rubber wheeled and smooth, it's perfectly fine. So don't try to pile on the glaze to fill in all the scratches, because eventually that's going to go away and those scratches will still be there. So please rubber wheel it before you do your stain and glaze. If anybody wanted the information, I do have a picture of the tools and then the order numbers if you need. And if there are any questions, whoever your sales rep is can help you out. And if they can't, then they can always get in touch with me and I can help them out. So the things that we just talked about, which really weren't tuning into here, but I say they're really important. It goes along with choosing the right materials, the right equipment, and tools it's lean manufacturing. So the whole theory behind that is eliminate the waste, make everything as lean and easy as possible, make things very visual, instead of looking at a pile of things and you're trying to find this needle in a haystack. Have things organized, have things labeled. When you need it, you know where it is, you know that it's there, it helps with inventory, you know how much you have left. You don't have boxes hiding somewhere else, and now you just ordered 10 more boxes of this same product, and you're standardizing your process. So that's all part of lean manufacturing, and if you are interested in it, you can obviously Google. There's plenty out there about lean manufacturing and 5S. And basically 5S is, sort through what you have, get rid of what you don't need, put everything in its place, and when you're done with it, put it back in its place, keep your area clean, standardize that process, and then sustain it. So when I was a much younger technician, this was introduced to me, and I was stubborn and naive and sassy. So I'm older now, I'm not as naive, definitely still sassy, but I wish that I had adopted this practice a long time ago. I kind of had the mentality that I'm busy, I'm a technician, I don't have time to stop and do all this crap. I just need to get the work done. I know where my stuff is. But having gone through the process, I can tell you that it is a really huge benefit to your workflow and something to think about. I do really strongly suggest you look into that. And really, that's all we have for today. And I thank you for taking your time to listen to me, share my opinion, and that's really all it is. It's my opinion based on my experience, based on what I see out there when I visit labs. And I hope it was helpful. If there are things that you want to see in future webinars, please feel free to reach out and let me know, and maybe we can work on putting something together for that. And at this time, if you do have any questions, I'm happy. And I am not seeing any questions, so I'll wait. I would like the order numbers. They are on the webinar, which you'll be able to view after this. And obviously, if you need any help, your salesperson can help you out. So I'm not sales, I'm just a technician, so I don't have the order numbers, straight off the top of my head. I don't know the order numbers of everything. I can go back to that slide. They are on there. So for the pre-centering, it's the Zirlux. How do you match katana shades to the more difficult, like the 3D shades? So that is difficult. I've played around with that a little bit. So if you have a shade, and say it's closest to A3, but the 3D shades tend to have a little more violet, pink, and like a reddish brown to them. So maybe a quick wash of some violet. You kind of have to play with it, and I haven't done it in a while. And I did practice it on a different zirconia, so they all interact differently. But what I would say is, match it to a Vita shade as close as you can, and then kind of look at it and go, okay, well, it has a little bit more of a violet hue, or it's got a little bit more pink. Put a light wash of some green state liquid on it, and I think that'll get you there, get you a lot closer. It is difficult, so it's possible, but you do have to do a little bit of experimenting. Any suggestions to tone down the brightness on the more opaque zirconias? So when you have a high strength zirconia, you have to accept that it's going to be higher in value. That's the nature of it. You can't, it is what it is. If you want to tone it down a little, I don't recommend blue, even though you think of blue as lowering the value when you're doing stain and glaze. For whatever reason, blue in the green state liquid actually brightens it. So I might put like a very little bit of light gray or violet. And again, you'll have to experiment to get exactly what you want. If you're having results that are incredibly bright, you might want to look into your program and make sure that your temperatures are correct for that zirconia, and also that your furnace is calibrated. Bumping up your high temp 10 to 20 degrees, in my opinion, I think that's perfectly fine. You will get you'll get a lower value, so it'll take a little bit of that brightness away. So you could try that. If you don't need to use a 1200 MPa zirconia, then don't. Then use something that's in your 700 to 950 range. It's still plenty strong enough, but it's going to give you the translucency and the vitality that you're looking for that you can't always get with the 1200. And that's my recommendation. The glaze to wear out, I guess that would depend on probably a lot, the patient's habits, what stain and glaze was used. My best guess is a couple years. I'm not really sure, but it's definitely something I can look into. But either way, we know that it's going to wear off at some point, so just do the right thing and just rubber wheel it. It doesn't take very long at all. It doesn't look like we have any further questions, so I, again, thank you for joining me and hearing what I have to say, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the summer.